At 4:47 a.m. on November 3, 1943, Private First Class Raymond Dutch Vandermeer crouched low in a soaked foxhole on Bougainville Island, staring at 9 Japanese scouts crawling through kunai grass 180 yards out. His standard-issue Springfield M1903 lay useless at his side. In his hands was something entirely different. An improvised rifle the Army had officially outlawed just 3 weeks earlier. His own captain had ordered every version destroyed. Within the next 2 days, all 9 of those scouts would be dead, taken out by a farm kid from Iowa who'd grown up eliminating groundhogs with a homemade contraption his grandfather called a hayrack special. The Army labeled it unauthorized. The Japanese called it unfair. Vandermeer simply called it survival. The story of how a banned rifle modification reshaped American sniper tactics in the Pacific doesn't start with heroics. It starts with dirt, loss, and a failing farm. Vandermeer had been raised outside Sioux City, Iowa, on 240 acres of corn and soybeans that barely supported the family. His father collapsed from a heart attack in the North Field when Raymond was just 12. His older brother found him face down in the furrows. After that, keeping the farm alive fell to Raymond, his mother, and 2 younger sisters who couldn't tell farm machinery apart. The farm's biggest problem was groundhogs, so destructive that decades earlier, Raymond's grandfather, a Dutch homesteader from 1891, had invented his own solution. He modified an old Winchester lever-action rifle, removed the standard stock, and added a flat wooden forward platform he called a hayrack. The shooter would lay the rifle across a hay bale or fence rail, using the extended plank for stability. It looked ridiculous, but it worked. By age 14, Raymond was hitting groundhogs at 220 yards. By 16, he was nailing coyotes at 300. He wasn't athletic, he wasn't a fighter, and he wasn't popular, but he could shoot. It was the one thing he was undeniably good at, earned through necessity and thousands of carefully rationed rounds. His draft notice arrived in December 1942. By March 1943, he was deployed to the Pacific. The real flaw in American jungle tactics wasn't obvious to officers sitting in clean headquarters in Brisbane or Noumea. On paper, the semi-automatic M1 Garand gave Americans a massive firepower advantage. 8 rounds, fast cycling, reliable, far superior to the Japanese Arisaka bolt-action rifle. But in dense jungle combat, paper advantages meant nothing. The Japanese rarely fought in the open. They hid in spider holes, camouflaged pits, and tree perches so well concealed that U.S. troops often walked right past them. They attacked at dawn or dusk when the light was murky. Their scouts, moving in pairs or trios, snuck close, mapped American weaknesses, fired a single devastating shot, and vanished before anyone could react. These scouts were killing American soldiers with frightening consistency. On Guadalcanal, Private Eddie Larson from Minnesota took a rifle round through the throat from a scout he never saw, hidden in a palm tree for 6 hours, only 40 yards away. Larson died in a minute and a half while his squad fired blindly into the jungle. On New Georgia, Corporal James Rutherford of Georgia was ambushed from a camouflaged pit he'd walked within 10 feet of. The scout waited until Rutherford passed, shot him in the back, then disappeared before the Americans reached the position. On Rendova, Sergeant Frank Hoskins lost 3 men in one morning to a single scout firing from a ridge nearly 200 yards off. The attacker fired, moved, fired again, never staying in one place long enough to target. When U.S. troops finally stormed the ridge 2 hours later, all they found were brass casings and footprints. This pattern repeated across the Solomons. Japanese scouts acted with almost complete freedom because U.S. infantry had no effective counter. The M1 Garand, ideal for close combat and rapid fire, lacked the long-range accuracy needed to hit a hidden shooter. Standard doctrine emphasized fire volume over precision. Spray, suppress, close with the enemy, but you can't close with an enemy you can't find. Vandermeer arrived on Bougainville in October 1943 and watched the same deadly cycle unfold. His unit, Company K of the 3rd Battalion, 148th Infantry Regiment, lost 2 men in the first week alone, both killed by scouts firing from beyond 150 yards, both dead before anyone spotted the shooter. The first was Private Tommy Whitaker, age 20, from Tennessee, engaged to a girl named Sarah. He was carrying ammo forward when a bullet punched through his chest. He died calling for his mother. The second was Corporal Vincent Calabresi from New York, a former longshoreman who'd worked the Brooklyn docks until the war pulled him across the world. He was shaving when the bullet struck, clean through the temple. His razor was still in his hand when they found him. Vandermeer had known both men. Not well, he'd only been with the unit for 3 weeks, but well enough to feel the loss. Whitaker had lent him a poncho during a downpour. Calabresi had taught him how to dig proper drainage around a foxhole. Now both were gone, because the Japanese dominated the long-distance fight. The official response barely scratched the problem. Officers issued Springfield M1903 rifles to selected marksmen, 1 per platoon. On paper, that seemed logical. The bolt-action Springfield was more accurate than the Garand, and its iron sights were rated for shots out to 300 yards. Theoretically, it filled the gap. In reality, it didn't come close. The Springfield standard sights were built for everyday infantry use, not pinpoint accuracy. At 200 yards in jungle terrain, shifting light, thick vegetation, brilliantly camouflaged targets, the sight picture was barely usable. Vandermeer received one of the Springfields and immediately spotted its flaws. The sights were too coarse. The stock design made the rifle unstable. Firing from a standing or kneeling stance introduced far too much movement. He tried going prone, but jungle terrain made that nearly impossible. Mud, roots, uneven ground, there was rarely a clean firing position. And even when he did find one, the standard Springfield setup simply wasn't steady enough to deliver the precision these situations required. More men kept dying. On October 28th, Private Leo Pfizer from Wisconsin took a round from a scout hidden in a tree line 175 yards away. Pfizer had been eating breakfast. The bullet entered below his left ear and exited through his right eye. He was dead before his mess kit hit the dirt. Vandermeer stood 20 feet away and watched. He watched medics pull a poncho over Pfizer's body, watched them move him to the collection point where the dead waited for graves registration, watched them place his wallet, letters, and photos into a small canvas bag. That night, sitting alone in his foxhole, Vandermeer thought of his grandfather's hayrack rifle. The modification wasn't complicated. He'd watched his grandfather build 3 versions over the years. The idea was straightforward. Extend the rifle's forward support to create a stable shooting platform, one that could rest on logs, rocks, sandbags, anything available. The challenge was recreating it with whatever scrap he could find in a combat zone. He began with discarded lumber from an ammunition crate, rough, splintery pine, but workable. He needed a plank roughly 18 inches long and 4 inches wide. He found what he needed in the supply dump just after evening chow on October 29th. Nobody questioned why he wanted it. Soldiers grabbed spare wood for all kinds of reasons, reinforcing foxholes, making stools, building makeshift tables. After dark, he worked in his foxhole, carving the wood with his trench knife and shaping it by flashlight. His plan was to build a platform that extended forward from the Springfield's forend, braced by 2 vertical struts connected to the barrel band and the front sight assembly. The struts were the tricky part. He needed something strong but lightweight, a material that wouldn't wreck the rifle's balance. He found the solution in the motor pool. 2 pieces of aluminum tubing from a damaged aircraft component, each about 6 inches long and 3/4 of an inch in diameter. He quietly took them around 11 p.m., walking past the motor sergeant, who was too busy with a parts inventory to notice. The nighttime jungle pressed in around him, thick, humid,
smelling of rot and stagnant water, with a faint petroleum haze drifting from the fuel dump. Mosquitoes whined around his head. His hands were already nicked and raw from the rough wood. He worked more by feel than sight, flashlight squeezed between shoulder and jaw. Attaching the struts required drilling holes. He didn't have a drill. So he improvised. He heated a nail over a small can of sterno, then drove the glowing metal through the wood to punch out the mounting holes. It took 40 minutes, left his hands streaked with soot, and blistered his fingers from gripping the hot nail through his pliers again and again. By 1:15 a.m. on October 30th, the basic structure was finished. A wooden platform extending 18 inches forward from the Springfield's forend, braced by 2 aluminum tubings secured to the barrel band with wires stripped from a communications cable. It looked absurd, awkward, homemade, something that belonged in a barn rather than a battlefield. But when he rested it on a sandbag and looked down the sights, everything changed. The rifle barely wobbled. The sight picture was rock solid. The instability that plagued standing and kneeling shots disappeared. He tested it the next morning. During a lull, he fired 3 rounds at a tree stump 225 yards away. All 3 shots landed within a 6-inch circle. With the standard rifle, he'd have been lucky to hit the stump at all. The modification worked. It was also absolutely forbidden. Army regulations strictly prohibited altering issued weapons. The manual stated clearly, rifles will remain in standard configuration without modification to barrel, stock, or sighting systems.
Vandermeer's homemade hay rack attachment violated Army regulations in every possible way. If anyone spotted it during inspection, he'd be facing a court-martial for altering government equipment, possibly even a dishonorable discharge. None of that mattered to him anymore. On November 1st, Corporal Danny Fletcher from Ohio, Vandermeer's tentmate, was shot by a Japanese scout firing from a ridge nearly 190 yards from the American line. Fletcher had been an auto mechanic back in Akron, and the night before, he'd shown Vandermeer photos of his 2 daughters. The scout fired a single round and vanished. Fletcher took the bullet in the abdomen and died over the next 12 agonizing minutes, calling for his wife. That was the breaking point. Vandermeer stopped caring what the rulebook said. The morning of November 3rd opened under a blanket of thick fog, wet, heavy, clinging to the kunai grass and low scrub like a living thing. Visibility was maybe 60 yards. The Japanese excelled at using fog like this, slipping close to American lines, probing defenses, mapping positions before dawn. Vandermeer was on watch along the northeastern sector of Company K's perimeter, his modified Springfield resting on a sandbag covered by a poncho to keep moisture away from the action. He hadn't told anyone about the alteration. As far as his squad knew, he carried a standard-issue rifle. Around 4:30 a.m., the fog began to ease, slowly peeling back. At 4:47, movement rippled through the kunai grass about 180 yards from the American line. It might have been the wind, or an animal, but Vandermeer doubted it. He watched through his sights, barely breathing. 30 seconds later, he saw them clearly, Japanese scouts advancing in a loose spread, low to the ground, using terrain perfectly. He counted 9. They were moving toward the American positions, trying to identify foxholes and firing lanes before full daylight. This was standard Japanese doctrine: approach quietly, observe, withdraw, report, and return in force. Vandermeer had maybe 10 minutes before they reached a vantage point that would expose the entire defensive layout of Company K. He didn't call for a sergeant. He didn't wake the others.
At 175 yards, they were well beyond the reliable reach of an M1 Garand. Too far for anyone else to take an effective shot, but not too far for him. He settled the hay rack platform on the sandbag. The rifle felt anchored, perfectly balanced, no instability at all. He worked the bolt, chambering around, feeling the clean mechanical lock of the action. The closest scout had edged ahead of the group, slipping through a narrow break in the grass. Vandermeer placed his front sight on the man's chest, exhaled slowly, and pressed the trigger. The Springfield cracked. The scout dropped instantly. The remaining 8 froze, stunned. At that distance, Americans weren't supposed to hit anything with precision. For 2 full seconds, none of them moved. Vandermeer cycled the bolt, found a second scout in his sights, and fired again. Another clean center mass hit. The man fell without a sound. Now the others understood. Panic ripped through their formation. They dove flat, scrambling backwards toward the tree line, but Vandermeer could still track their movement through the grass. The hay rack gave him the steady platform they never expected. He followed a third scout, moving quickly, fired, hit him in the shoulder. The man kept crawling, slowed but not stopped. Vandermeer worked the bolt again and fired a second shot. The scout went still. 3 down. 6 left. The fog continued lifting. The remaining scouts tried to retreat, but they had nearly 180 yards of open ground behind them. Vandermeer had an unobstructed shot. A 4th scout sprinted for the tree line, a fatal mistake. Vandermeer led him by 2 feet, accounting for speed, and squeezed the trigger. The scout collapsed mid-stride. 4 down, 5 to go. Now they were desperate. 2 scouts fired back, sending Arisaka rounds cracking past Vandermeer's foxhole, tearing into sandbags. He ducked, counted to 3, then rose again. Another scout was moving right to left at about 160 yards. Vandermeer tracked him, led the shot slightly, fired, hit him in the leg. The man fell but dragged himself through the grass. Vandermeer chambered another round, steadied, and fired again. The scout stopped moving. 5 down. The last 4 were fleeing fast, abandoning stealth completely. Vandermeer fired at a 6th scout and missed. 2 rushed. He corrected, fired again, and caught him square in the back. The scout dropped face first. 6 down. 3 remaining. The last 3 reached the tree line. Vandermeer fired twice as they disappeared into heavy vegetation. He couldn't confirm the hits. He watched the brush for another 5 minutes, but they were gone. The entire firefight had taken 8 minutes. Vandermeer felt his hands trembling, not from fear, but from the violent surge of adrenaline. He had just killed 6, possibly 7 men in less time than a soldier needed to finish breakfast. He leaned back in his foxhole, breathing hard, the Springfield still resting on its improvised platform. Behind him, voices approached, his squad emerging from their positions after hearing the fire gun. Sergeant Miller arrived first, a stout Pennsylvanian who'd been in the Army since 1940. "What the hell happened?" Miller demanded. "Japanese scouts," Vandermeer replied, though his voice sounded distant to his own ears. 9 of them. I got 6 confirmed, maybe 7. Miller stared at him. "At what range?" "Started at about 180 yards. Last ones were around 160. "Bullshit," Miller said flatly. "Nobody hits at that distance with a Springfield." Vandermeer didn't argue. He simply pointed toward the kunai glass, where bodies were now visible as daylight strengthened. Miller looked, counted, and his expression shifted. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. By 6:30 a.m., word had spread through Company K. The quiet farm kid from Iowa had dropped 6, maybe 7 Japanese scouts in 8 minutes at ranges most men couldn't believe possible with a standard infantry rifle. Soldiers gathered to see Vandermeer's foxhole, the bodies in the grass, and finally the rifle itself. Corporal Bill Henderson from Kansas was the first to notice the wooden platform jutting from the Springfield's fore end. "What the hell is that?" he asked, pointing at the improvised extension. Vandermeer answered plainly, without bragging. "It's a stability platform."
His grandfather had built something similar for groundhog hunting. It eliminated rifle sway and made long-distance shots possible. Henderson stared at the contraption. "That's not standard issue." "No," Vandermeer replied, "it's not. Regulations say you can't modify weapons." "I know." Henderson glanced to the bodies lying out in the grass, then back at the rifle. "Hell with the regulations," he finally said. "Can you make me one?" Private First Class Mike Sullivan from Boston overheard the exchange. "Make one for me, too." By noon, Vandermeer had 7 requests. By nightfall, he had 15. The problem was materials. Vandermeer had built his original hay rack out of whatever scraps he could scavenge, but building 15 more required supplies he didn't have. Henderson fixed that almost immediately. He was the company scrounger, the man who could find anything, anywhere, if you gave him enough time. Within 48 hours, he'd gathered a mountain of scrap lumber, aluminum tubing, and wire, enough to build 20 platforms. Vandermeer worked after dark in the supply tent, crafting hayrack platforms by flashlight and kerosene lamp. The process was crude but effective. Each one took about 90 minutes, cutting lumber, heating a nail to burn mounting holes, bending and fitting the aluminum struts, tying everything together with wire and tension. He didn't ask permission, he didn't fill out forms, he just built them and passed them to any man who wanted one. Within a week, 23 soldiers in Company K were carrying modified Springfields. And the effect was immediate and unmistakable. On November 9th, 2 Japanese scouts approached the perimeter at dawn. Sullivan, using a hayrack-equipped Springfield, killed both from 195 yards before they got close enough to observe American positions. On November 12th, a 3-man scout team probed the southern defenses. Corporal Henderson dropped all 3 in under 3 minutes, range 210 yards. By November 15th, Japanese scouting activity stopped altogether in Company K's sector. They shifted their reconnaissance efforts to other units that didn't have modified rifles. Word traveled quickly. By late November, soldiers from other companies were asking about the hayrack system. How did it work? Could Vandermeer make more? He could, and he did. By December, an estimated 60 modified Springfields were in use across the 148th Infantry Regiment. The mod spread entirely through word of mouth, soldiers teaching soldiers, NCOs passing tips to other NCOs. No paperwork, no approvals, just quiet conversations and nighttime construction. The Japanese noticed. Captured intelligence reports from late November 1943 described unexpected long-range accuracy by enemy marksmen and escalating scout casualties. A report dated November 28th warned Americans now capable of engaging scouts at extended range, increased caution required. A diary taken from a Japanese sergeant recorded this entry from December 3rd. Americans are shooting differently now. Cannot approach. 3 scouts lost yesterday at distances we believed safe. Something has changed. But the clearest confirmation came from interrogation notes. A Japanese corporal captured on December 18th stated that forward observers had been ordered to maintain at least 250 yards of distance from American positions, up from the previous 150-yard standard. When asked why, he answered simply, "Because they can kill us farther away than before." The modification worked, both tactically and psychologically. For months, the Japanese had dominated the long-range fight. Now, suddenly, they didn't. Success, however, attracted the wrong kind of attention. On December 21st, 1943, Captain Robert Thornton conducted a surprise inspection of Company K's weapons. Thornton was West Point trained, rigid about regulations, a man who believed discipline began with uniform equipment.
Within the first hour, he discovered 23 modified Springfields. "What," Thornton demanded, holding one of the rifles in disbelief, "is this?" Sergeant Miller tried to explain. The modification increased accuracy, it saved lives, scout casualties had dropped dramatically, but Thornton cut him off. "This is unauthorized alteration of government property," he snapped. "A direct violation of Army regulations." He turned to Miller. "Who's responsible?" Miller paused. "I don't know, sir. Men just started showing up with them." Thornton didn't believe a word of it. He insisted, "Somebody built these. I want a name." Silence. Not one man spoke. Thornton's face hardened. "Fine. All modified rifles will be confiscated immediately and destroyed. Anyone found with one after 1,800 hours today will face court-martial." He wasn't bluffing. By that evening, 23 hayrack platforms had been removed and thrown into a fire pit. Vandermeer watched the wood and aluminum melt down to ash, feeling something cold and heavy settle inside him. 2 days later, Japanese scouts killed Private First Class George Martinez from Texas with a single shot from 185 yards while he was filling canteens. He died before medics reached him. Martinez had been using a hayrack rifle until Thornton's order took it away. That night, Vandermeer built another platform. He didn't hide it. He didn't pretend it was authorized. He was done pretending.
He didn't argue, didn't justify it. He simply built another hayrack, fastened it to his Springfield, and returned to his position on the perimeter. 3 other soldiers quietly did the same. Sergeant Miller discovered the renewed modifications the next morning. He pulled Vandermeer aside. "If the captain sees that, you're finished," Miller warned. "Court-martial, dishonorable discharge, maybe even Leavenworth." "I know," Vandermeer replied. "Then why do it?" "Because it works," Vandermeer said simply. "Because Martinez is dead, and he wouldn't be if he still had his platform. Because more men will die if we keep obeying regulations instead of common sense." Miller studied him for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Keep it hidden during inspections. I'll cover for you where I can." And so, the underground rebuilding effort resumed. Men quietly constructed new platforms, hid them during inspections, and used them only during combat operations. By mid-January 1944, around 40 modified rifles were once again circulating throughout the regiment. Captain Thornton never uncovered them, or if he did, he chose not to escalate it further. But someone higher in the chain of command eventually noticed what was happening. The numbers told the story more clearly than any rifle inspection ever could. In October 1943, before the hayrack existed, Company K averaged 4.2 casualties per week from scout fire, counting both killed and wounded who couldn't return fire effectively. In November, once the modification spread, the number dropped to 1.8 casualties per week. In December, even with Thornton's confiscation order and the secret rebuilding effort, the figure remained at 2.1 casualties per week. Across the entire 148th Infantry Regiment, the pattern was identical. Before the modification, 17.6 weekly casualties from scout activity. After the modification spread, 6.3, a reduction of 64%. Conservative estimates suggested that between November 1943 and March 1944, the hayrack platform prevented roughly 130 casualties, about 40 of which would have been fatal. Someone in division headquarters eventually saw the statistical anomaly. On February 8, 1944, 3 officers arrived at Company K's position, not to punish anyone, but to understand why one regiment's scout casualties had dropped so dramatically while everyone else still suffered heavily. Sergeant Miller showed them the modified rifle, explained its purpose, and demonstrated its stability. The lead investigator, Major Wilson, turned the rifle over thoughtfully. "This isn't in the manual," he said. "No, sir," Miller replied. "Who designed this?" Miller pointed across the company area. "Private Vandermeer, sir." Wilson approached Vandermeer, who was cleaning his rifle nearby. "Private, did you create this modification?" "Yes, sir." "Where did the design come from?" "My grandfather, sir. He used something like it for groundhog hunting." Wilson raised an eyebrow. "Groundhogs?" "Yes, sir." Wilson examined the platform again, rotating the rifle in his hands. "It's crude," he admitted, "but it's effective." He looked directly at Vandermeer. "How many of these did you make?" 23 originally, sir. Captain Thornton ordered them destroyed. The men have been rebuilding them since." "Thornton destroyed them?" Wilson asked, his voice tightening. "Yes, sir. Unauthorized modification of government property." Wilson's expression sharpened into something cold. "Captain Thornton may be technically correct, but he's also an idiot." He handed the rifle back to Vandermeer. "Keep building them. I'll deal with Thornton." What followed took nearly 3 months and involved more bureaucracy than Vandermeer had ever imagined possible. Major Wilson filed a detailed report recommending official evaluation of the Hayrack platform. That report sat on a desk at division headquarters for 6 weeks before anyone read it. When it was finally reviewed, it was forwarded to the Army Ground Forces Equipment Board, the unit responsible for analyzing field improvisations. In April 1944, the board sent a team to Bougainville. They conducted thorough tests, comparing accuracy between standard Springfields and Hayrack-equipped rifles at distances from 100 to 400 yards. They interviewed soldiers. They reviewed casualty statistics. Their conclusion, filed in May 1944, the Hayrack stability platform significantly increases practical accuracy at distances beyond 150 yards. Recommend authorization for field manufacture and adoption for designated marksmen in the Pacific Theater. They added one more recommendation. Develop a factory-produced version for improved durability and uniformity. In June 1944, official approval was granted. Supply sergeants across the Pacific received construction guidelines, and designated marksmen were formally encouraged to adopt the modification. The authorization included no mention of Vandermeer, no credit, no citation. The official record attributed the innovation to field adaptations by combat personnel responding to operational needs. Vandermeer didn't mind. He hadn't done it for recognition. He had done it to keep his fellow soldiers alive.
By August 1944, roughly 800 Hayrack-equipped Springfields were in use across the Pacific. By the end of the war, that number had climbed past 2,000. The modification became so common that Japanese intelligence reports from 1945 routinely referred to these platform rifles as a specific American tactical threat. When the war was over, Vandermeer went back to Iowa. In the spring of 1946, he took charge of the family farm, married his high school acquaintance Eleanor, and spent the next 43 years raising corn and soybeans on the same 240 acres his grandfather had settled. He spoke little about his service. When asked, he would simply say he'd served in the infantry in the Pacific, then change the subject. The original Hayrack Springfield, the one he built in October 1943 and smuggled home in his duffel, hung above his workshop bench. He still used it for groundhogs. It still worked. In 1987, a military historian researching Pacific Theater field innovations tracked him down through veteran records. The historian wanted to talk about the Hayrack design, how it began, how it spread, what impact it had. Vandermeer agreed reluctantly. The interview was short. He explained his grandfather's design, the groundhog hunts, the frustration of watching good men die because they couldn't return accurate fire. "Did you know," the historian asked, "that your modification is credited with saving around 200 lives?"
Vandermeer shook his head. I just built what made sense. You were never officially recognized for it. I didn't need to be. Doesn't it bother you? He paused. No, I didn't do it for recognition. I did it because Fletcher, Martinez, Whitaker, they deserved better than dying to scouts they never saw. The historian eventually published his research. A chapter of his book focused on Pacific Theater field innovations in World War II and named Vandermeer as the creator of the HARAC platform, estimating its life-saving impact. Vandermeer never read it. Eleanor bought a copy, but he left it untouched on the shelf. Raymond Vandermeer died on March 14, 1989, at age 66, from complications of emphysema. His obituary in the Sioux City Journal mentioned his Army service, his decades of farming, and the family he left behind, his wife, 3 children, and 7 grandchildren. It said nothing about the HARAC rifle, nothing about Japanese scouts or casualty statistics or tactical breakthroughs. His grandson inherited the original HARAC Springfield. Today, it sits in a gun safe in Des Moines, a crude wooden platform strapped to a 1943 M1903 Springfield built by a farm kid who solved a battlefield problem the same way farmers fix everything, with whatever scraps are available and no patience for needless bureaucracy. The real lesson here isn't about rifles or marksmanship or even battlefield innovation. It's about initiative. War doesn't wait for permission. It doesn't pause for engineering studies, committee reviews, or doctrine updates. Men die while paperwork circulates. The HARAC platform worked because one soldier recognized a deadly gap, had the skills to fix it, and the courage to act, despite official resistance. Innovation came not from generals or colonels or academy graduates, but from a private first class from Iowa who grew up shooting groundhogs and refused to watch more friends die for lack of a workable solution. That's how real change happens in wartime, through soldiers who see a problem and fix it, through sergeants willing to look the other way, through majors who recognize effectiveness when it appears and are ready to push back against their own bureaucracy. The HARAC platform eventually became sanctioned doctrine, found its way into sniper training, influenced post-war rifle design, and saved countless lives. But it began as an illegal, improvised add-on built at night by a farm boy with a trench knife and scrap wood, someone who decided human lives mattered more than the rule book. Sometimes that's all it takes. One person, one idea, one refusal to wait for permission. The rest is just paperwork. If this story moved you, please like the video, subscribe for more untold histories, and leave a comment sharing where you're watching from. Thank you for keeping these stories alive.